like Matt said, I am a school teacher. And right now I actually have some volunteers walking among the crowd. Just look for them. They're going to be passing out Scantrons and number 2 yellow pencils. You'll need to pass the quiz at the end of my talk to be allowed to leave, okay? So please pay attention. I'm just kidding, of course. Hey, Matt and I actually share a lot of things, and I very much appreciate him asking me to come talk to you. I hope you agree that, I hope you appreciate it once I'm done too, but Matt was born overseas and came to this country. So did I. I was born on an island in the Pacific, and I came to America when I was a child. And I can honestly say the American exceptionalism that he talks about is very true. And while the first place I came in America was very unlike the island I was born on, you have to understand I was raised in a town of about 50 people. And when I came to America, there were just these huge cities. People were moving fast. People were wearing things like watches and shoes and all those modern things. And I felt very lost. The first town our family settled in was this metropolis of 8,000 people called Atascadero. We lived off of Morrow Road over there. And man, what a head-spinning event that was. Anyway, hey, I am a school teacher. But before I begin my talk, I would like to say that I know we've heard a lot of negative things about school teachers in the news recently and all the rest, but there are a great number of school teachers that are doing the right thing and are working to try to educate rightly the youth of tomorrow. And looking at the audience that we have here, we definitely need more youth, like the fellow that spoke earlier, to come up and stand for what's right with you guys too. I've been a high school teacher for the last 12 years, and I've taught American government for most of that time. I can honestly say it's been one of the most rewarding and sometimes frustrating things I did. You see, popular assumptions aside, high school students are not idiots. Rather, most students are intelligent, and once their curiosity has been piqued, they are eager to keep learning. The trouble is that once students start reading the Constitution for the first time, they invariably have trouble understanding how things that seem so clear upon reading don't seem to align with how things actually exist in society today. In many cases, I'm left explaining the difference between what the framers intended and the intervening history that has led us to where we are today. When they read phrases like, Congress shall make no law respecting, etc., and they'll say things like, Mr. Maas, if that's the case, then why are there laws about such and so forth? Well, many of these questions involve violations of rights or the assumption of the violation of rights. And I've heard a lot about rights today so far. For example, when studying the Fourth Amendment, students ask, Mr. Maas, if we're supposed to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, why can't an airport screener rifle through your gear and take things like spare lithium batteries and nail clippers? It doesn't seem right. For those that are wondering, nail clippers are now allowed, but be careful of the ones with the pointing nail file thing on them. Seriously. A large body of student complaints come from what seem to be like a violation of those rights. Things like free speech rights, locker rights, bathroom use rights, internet use, and so forth. After being exposed to the Constitution and then having to explain something they wrote in class to the principal, they'll give me questions like, doesn't the Constitution give us the right to free speech? In a section included in one of the high school texts on the Bill of Rights, there is included the following hypothetical question, and I'm going to quote this for you. If you were in charge of writing the Constitution today, what rights would you give to people? The question presumes that rights enumerated in the Constitution were considered the most important to our founders, like not having British soldiers stationed in their private homes, but that they couldn't foresee other important things like the right to high-speed internet. Well, those are good questions, but both start with a faulty premise. You see, the Constitution doesn't grant us rights, nor do our rights come from government. At the Constitutional Convention, there were a number of important debates. One such debate was over Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, otherwise known as the Elastic Clause or the Necessary and Proper Clause. Congress shall have power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or the department or officer thereof. Well, the Anti-Federalists argued that this would permit limitless power to the new government, permitting officials to pretty much do anything they wanted and to become new homegrown tyrants. Federalists like Alexander Hamilton, who wanted a more powerful centralized government, argued vigorously against this view, saying that it was clear that Congress would only have power in this clause to allow for the execution of powers narrowly granted to the national government in the Constitution. For example, if there was to be a U.S. Army, Congress could authorize military colleges to train those soldiers. The Anti-Federalists were not placated by men like Hamilton. People like George Mason argued that unless we included a Bill of Rights listing some of the most important rights retained by the people, the national government would assume someday that they could infringe upon those rights. The Anti-Federalists were prescient in their fears of government abuse, for even they would have had a hard time believing that later courts and the national government would hold that the Elastic Clause, coupled with a misinterpretation of the Commerce Clause, would allow the national government to hold in the 1942 Wickard versus Filburn case that the government can regulate the amount of wheat a farmer can grow on his own property for personal consumption, or that today government can enforce an individual mandate portion of Obamacare. Well, one of the biggest debates today is over the question of original intent. Some people argue that we cannot begin to fathom what was in the minds of the Founding Fathers. And even if we could, it would not matter to us today. I say we have never needed to somehow mind read the people of the 1700s. They wrote down their thoughts and explained them. We can read their words. And in my opinion, some of the most explicit are found in the 9th and 10th Amendments to our Constitution. And the 9th Amendment, like Matt said, is one of those ones that people often forget about. But it says, "The enumeration in this Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people." Its sister amendment, the 10th, says, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited to it by the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people." Or in other words, just because some right isn't listed doesn't mean that you still don't have it. It's always been yours. You were born with it. That's the inherent part. And that's why it's okay to list some rights, like your right not to have to quarter soldiers in your home. The list is not exhaustive. In fact, it's just the opposite. The rights of the national government are exhaustive, or they should be, by what's listed in the Constitution. Just because we pick some of the most important rights at the time in the 1700s doesn't mean that the national government can tell you how much wheat to grow or what health care you must buy. It also means that just because we didn't have telephone or airplanes or the internet in the 1700s doesn't mean that you don't already have some rights pertaining to those things too. This is pretty clear even to my students. Oh, so you already have lots of rights, like the Declaration of Independence says. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Unalienable. Definition. It can't be taken away. The question really is, do we have a government that is limited in purpose and powers to do only the things that we, the sovereign people, give it to do, and for certain designated purposes, or is it an amorphous, tyrannical government that can tell us to do whatever it wants? Dr. McHenry, a Maryland delegate at the Constitutional Convention, recorded an exchange occurring on the final day between Benjamin Franklin and a lady outside on the street. The unnamed lady asked Dr. Franklin, "Well, doctor, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy?" "A republic, if you can keep it," Dr. Franklin replied. "Our founders gave us a republic and recognized the rights that we already possessed as individuals. Today, let us renew our obligation to recognize and keep those rights secure from a national government that increasingly resembles the worst aspect of despotic regimes of old."